Hello, I'm Clayton Vance, and welcome to the Clayton Vance Podcast, where we discuss the art and soul of architecture and help explain why the world looks the way it does. Today, our guest is Paul Monson, who is the Director of Architecture at the Utah Valley University School of Architecture. And this is the second of a three-part episode or a three-part series with Paul, where we're discussing the what, the why, and the how of architecture. And in this episode, we're going to cover the why. We're going to cover why traditional architecture, why they decide to go that direction, and why it's important for you to actually understand what is happening at traditional schools of architecture in this country, which I believe there's a few, and nowadays, how they are different than modernist schools in terms of what they teach and what they focus on, and how that will begin to shape the world in which we live. So, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Clayton. Good to be here.
Good. And let's just dive into it. Why? Why have you, as the director, kind of chosen to go down this path of traditional architecture at the Utah Valley University?
Well, let me talk a little bit about the founding of our program.
You bet.
Maybe first, and then we can get into some of the big ideas that you're talking about. Since the 1940s, the only program in the state of Utah was the University of Utah, the only accredited architecture program. And in 2019, there was a professor named David Barker at UVU who had this crazy idea of creating a second school of architecture in Utah. He was the one that really founded the program. I was the president of a nonprofit at the time called the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art, which is a national nonprofit and has chapters all over the country. I was the president of the Utah chapter. And David reached out to me through a mutual friend, and was asking about if our little nonprofit had any angles or ideas on what might help this new fledgling architecture program have its own identity. David comes from a craft background as a carpenter. He really wanted the UVU program to be practical and train students to be employable and understand how buildings are put together just in a very straightforward, simple way, which is, look, I've got respect for other universities that teach architecture in a lot of ways. I admire what they do, but they have a different approach. Most schools are teaching, it's more of a conceptual, more of a theoretical, idea-based education about architecture. And certainly they all have some practical side to them, but David wanted this program for that to be the focus of it. Reached out to me, and we started holding some workshops at UVU and bringing in guest speakers to talk more about classicism from that angle. Like, classical and traditional architecture is a very practical system. It's time-tested, and we've learned over centuries what is going to work, what's going to be durable and last. And if we want to build buildings that are, as you said, sustainable, what does that mean? What is true sustainability? And I would talk about our throwaway culture when I talk about sustainability. We just live in a very disposable culture.
Okay, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Yeah. I've got a hilarious story about disposable culture. So early 20s, my grandparents lived up in Oak Hills in Provo, just above BYU. And so we're visiting them for Christmas. They have a super steep driveway, and it just snowed. And so I'm out there shoveling the snow. I don't know how old they are. They're late 70s or something. Yeah, probably late 70s, early 80s. And the snow shovel breaks. This snow shovel, it's got to be like 40 years old. Metal, wood handle. I go inside. I'm like, hey, Grandpa, the shovel broke. Should we just go get a new one? He's like, no, let's go fix it. And that generation, yeah, we're not buying a new snow shovel.
Yeah.
We're going to fix the one we have. So anyway, small little anecdote.
Yeah, and multiply that times a million, and that's the resources that it takes to build a building, right? So, I mean, a snow shovel or like a shirt or something, maybe like we can give ourselves an excuse to throw some things away. But when buildings, it doesn't make sense. Buildings take so much embodied energy. I think it's like 40% of the energy consumption in the United States is from buildings. So like, it doesn't make sense to just experiment with buildings or build them in this cheap throwaway manner.
Yeah, I think commercial buildings, I think your lifespan is generally going to be like 45 to 65 years in terms of like the functional.
If you're lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that is one saving grace. So silver lining to modern buildings. They won't last that long. They'll be torn down and we can replace them with something more beautiful. But yeah, so David and I started talking. I was working for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a temple designer at the time. And it's a long story, but through a series of events that happened, it became clear to me that it was time to make a change in my profession and become a teacher. David Barker started the program. There was a guy named Brandon Rowe, Professor Rowe, who joined very early, and they really built most of the curriculum of the program. I was teaching as an adjunct, and we were bringing in speakers, and we were doing workshops and things for students to learn the classical orders, because it's a very practical system. It's a very teachable and learnable system of architecture. And a lot of schools will say things like architecture can't be taught. Like, it's not something you can actually teach. You just have to kind of like absorb it by observing things.
Okay, I haven't heard that one before.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a common trope.
Really?
Yeah. You hear that all the time from other schools. Like, can architecture even be taught? Well, the way I see architecture is it's a language, and a language can be taught.
Yeah.
And we can learn spelling and grammar and syntax and all of these rules of design. If you learn the rules, then you can innovate and you can invent and you can change, you can break rules in exciting ways. But you have to know the rules first. You have to be able to speak coherently, and just like music. I use the analogy of music a lot. Both my parents were musicians, grew up in a musical family, and anybody can learn music. I'm going to quote from Suzuki again. This is Shinichi Suzuki, the Suzuki method. He said, "Musical ability is not an inborn talent, but an ability which can be developed. Any child who is properly trained can develop musical ability just as all children develop the ability to speak their mother tongue. The potential of every child is unlimited." And if you think about that, it's remarkable that millions of Japanese kids can speak Japanese, and millions of American kids can speak English. Mm-hmm. We all were able to learn it. Mm-hmm. Just like we can learn music, you can learn design. Some people speak really well.
Yeah.
And eloquent, and you just listen to them, and you're on the edge of your seat. Just, they're very interesting. And some people are really boring, or they never really took the time to develop that skill very far. But I think the same is true with architecture.
So it's going back to the why.
Yeah.
You got the modernist stuff. And what I guess for everyone, when we're talking about modernist and classical, really what we're doing is we're not necessarily doing two camps. What we're doing is we're doing a spectrum of realized aesthetics, like physical stuff out there. And it's like, what makes something traditional and or classical versus what makes something more modernist or modern, and how does contemporary fit in that? And so there's this spectrum of aesthetic when we're going around observing our built environment with architecture. and it can fit somewhere on this spectrum. When we talk about high classicism, we're talking about typically some sort of Greco-Roman architecture, neoclassicism, something that adheres to the principles of classical architecture perfectly strictly, and then there's variations on a theme that go all the way till the abolition of ornament and the, I guess, throwing away of quote unquote order and making it much more subjective and just space. And so we all have experience. Everyone on this planet has experience with modernist architecture. We all do, every single person. But not all of us have experience with traditional or classical architecture, because when you look at how much has been built within the last, I guess, 100 years, we destroyed half of Europe, right, in the last century, and then we rebuilt it with a bunch of stuff that honestly doesn't look as good as the stuff they destroyed. And then the majority of the United States of America has been built since 1940. We're talking, if you look at just housing count, I think there was about 20 million houses or something like prior to 1940 or something, and then there was 10 million and 10 million and 20 million and 20 million every year. And so the majority of our built environment is post World War II, after we kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater. And so I hear from my own clients, give me something timeless, give me something traditional. And so we use this word timeless. Now, when I hear someone say, give me something timeless, what I'm hearing is, give me something beautiful. But because we've accepted the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I don't think people have that confidence to be able to use the word beauty. And so they use the word timeless. So traditional, I guess for all of us, explain to us as simply as you can the difference between like a traditional or classical aesthetic, modernist aesthetic, and help us understand that why.
So when we start talking about these terms like traditional and classical and modernism, we really quickly run up against the limitations of language. And it's difficult because we don't all have the same definition of these terms in our head. But where I'm coming from is traditional architecture you can think of as pretty much any architecture prior to the mid-20th century or early 20th century, where there was a movement called modernism. Well, that's how historians call it, modernism. That was, when you put the ism after a word, it means that there's like an ideology, a really interest in almost obsession with some kind of term or idea. And the thing that everyone was excited about in the early 20th century, our great-great-grandparents, was the future.
And justifiably so, in all honesty.
Well,
because there were so many technological advancements, just new things. Novelty was the thing of the age.
The Industrial Revolution. Yeah. And going back a little bit to the French Enlightenment, the advances that were possible because we started thinking and using the scientific method and more rational approaches. We were quickly advancing in technology, and it's really exciting. And it was a very optimistic time. And a lot of the things that you see built, like, you go to Disneyland and you visit these visionary exhibits of Tomorrowland, and we were going to be able to like process all of our food, like even meat, and we were going to make spam, and we're going to have all of this like prepackaged stuff, and like it was not natural. It was using technology to dominate and try to control this natural world that is really scary and threatening. And it was a hopeful time. It was a really exciting time. And it was also an acknowledgement of the failures of the 1800s and early 1900s, World War I, World War II, where these values were not saving all of humanity as we thought they might. They had become stale. The Industrial Revolution had turned classical things into mass-produced objects that you could just purchase as a consumer thing. It wasn't handmade anymore. It wasn't connected to nature anymore. And there was a lot of pushback against that. Before modernism, there was a lot of romantic pushback with like neo-Gothic and Victorian and other movements that were trying to find something, arts and crafts, trying to find something more authentic. But in the mid-20th century, there were some big thinkers like Le Corbusier and Gropius and others who just wanted to throw it all out. Just like, let's just sit in a blank white room and think about what we've done for a while and start over with brand new principles of architecture. And so I think you have to really acknowledge that was a movement, an aesthetic movement, a cultural movement that changed the way that we design things in a major way. And that's what we call it, modernism. It's kind of lumping a lot of things together and maybe oversimplifying it, but there's a break there. And so things that are designed with that aesthetic of novelty, innovation, the machine as kind of the ideal, you could put in that camp of modernism, which can produce some amazing things, right? I mean, a lot of the things that we take for granted today, modern medicine and these inventions that make our life, our quality of life much better, are a result of that. I'm really grateful. But also we kind of threw a lot of things out that maybe we didn't mean to. Like, we got rid of beautiful things and ornament and architecture that was more durable and built with pitch roofs and moldings and all of this language of architecture that we threw out so that we could start over. And now the last few decades, a lot of people have been rediscovering these things and making them new again. Every time the classical comes back, it's like a perennial flower that always is a little different. It's not the exact same flower, and whatever culture it flowers in is a little different. And we have our own unique culture, our own unique needs wherever your listeners are. We're here in Utah. We have our own natural environment, our own materials, and that's what we should be looking to, just like the Greeks. They went to the mountain and carved marble blocks out of the hills and brought them down to build the Parthenon. It doesn't make as much sense in our culture naturally to go to China and get stone and go to all these foreign exotic places and bring it here. You can do that, but there's a kind of natural traditional architecture which is born out of the context and materials in a local place that I'm also really interested in, because it's different wherever you go.
Yeah.
And that's something that makes life really interesting. So not all this, every place looks exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay, a couple questions. Mine's going all sorts of different directions. But just to nail down that point of local materials, it's like even when we went to the University of Notre Dame, it has a very specific brick. All the buildings are this yellow brick, which comes from the mud of the lakes that they fired, and that's the brick color. It wasn't anything other than that's what the material they had, that's what they used, and that's what it looks like.
Right.
And so there, as you were talking about the kind of the wholesale rejection, throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of traditional craft, all that type of stuff, and this adoption of all the technological advances over the last 150 years. Why do you think it is Why do you think it is that there was such a wholesale buy-in from virtually everybody? Virtually everybody. There wasn't. There was a. I don't know of anybody. The rare exception, or who, was kind of on the sideline saying, "This is a terrible idea. Maybe we should rethink this." And by the way, these are kind of ugly. I mean, my grandpa, the one I just talked about, he lived in a modernist house, right? And so he built that in what, 60, late 50s or early 60s. I can't remember, last century. And it flat roof. And that's what I was used to. I grew up in a suburban split level and or modernist aesthetic. That's what I was raised on, nurtured to understand and know in my experience. So that's question number one, is why do you think there was such a wholesale buy-in?
I am not a historian, but I read history. I am fascinated by that question, and I don't have all the answers for sure. From the books and people that I have studied, I really think that the trauma of the first two world wars was deep and something that we still haven't really recovered from. It's taken generations. We think of it like that it was so far in the past, but really, like, it was only a couple of generations.
Yeah, it was our grandparents.
Yeah. Trauma will completely change your psychology. And when we went through that, the horrors of World War I and World War II, we just yearned for something different and something new. It had to be like, it had to look totally different. Yeah. And we didn't want.
It was almost like
the same. And the technology advances. As human beings, there's some kind of internal drive in us. The Romans had it. The Greeks had it. Every culture has it, to use the best of the technology that you have. And we had so much new technology so fast that it seems to demand new forms. And so you experiment with these things. And it's not until a couple generations later when you can look back on it objectively and measure things and say, like, these promises of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, of super highways, and we would just have these tower buildings, we'd be flying around in our little Jetsons cars, and like, life is going to be great, just eating Spam and nothing from nature. Everything's like highly processed through industry. Like, we realized that the promises weren't fulfilled. I'm stuck in traffic and all this is ugly, and I feel isolated, I feel alienated, I feel alone, I'm like so distracted, everything's just like consumerism. And so that failed us too. And now I think we're at a point where we can really say, well, what was the good from modernism that we want to take? What was the good from pre-modernism? And all global cultures, because we have a unique ability to be so connected with cultures around the world, where previously we got our news from a very limited context, sources.
Right, which if you actually listen to Chase Hughes, the CIA kind of guy who's super, he talks about psyops. I learned this just yesterday, listening to something. Apparently Walter Cronkite was hired CIA. And so the everything was curated, right? The story and the narrative that was taught and told was 100% curated to, like, I guess, address, just propagate a particular agenda. And so what I'm hearing is that it was essentially the final dismantling of the old way of doing things in terms of World War I and II.
In French, they call it the ancien regime, the ancient way, the old way, the way of the kings, the way of
the
the
aristocracy out. Boom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the French
Church
Revolution
out.
started the big snowball, and it just kept rolling, and Industrial Revolution until we really had these new materials, concrete and steel, and those were exciting, and we wanted to experiment with them, and we did, and it became the mainstream. It just happened to be when we wrote all of our zoning laws that govern everything in our cities and our building codes, and it institutionalized a certain way of building so that it is the only way almost that we know how to build anymore, because the traditional craftsmen, the traditional designers, were pushed out. They're pushed out of education. They're pushed out of the profession. That wasn't the way that we wanted to build anymore. So I have a quote. This is from one of my mentors, Stephen Semmes, at Notre Dame. He said, "In the present moment, we decide what aspects of the past shall have a future by choosing what to take with us and what to leave behind. That act of selection, whether conscious or unconscious, is tradition." Modernism itself became a tradition. It is what we do. And whether we're conscious of it or not, that is the standard way of building. It's the way that contractors are used to building everything that we see around us. And so it's like swimming upstream to create a program that teaches something different. But we felt like there are values that need to be learned in architectural education that just aren't being taught in most universities.
So the idea of sustainability, that's a big one, because that's a word to everyone. I mean, we've got protests about sustainability. We've got everything sustainable, and we're buying our groceries that are sustainably grown, and all of this, and it's become this little catchphrase. It's like, from an architectural frame of reference, how would you define what true sustainability actually is? Because I look at all of it and I'm pretty suspicious. I guess my paradigms have been so kind of destroyed over my lifetime that I'm really suspicious of anything that comes out and says I'm organic or I'm sustainable, or what's being taught, or if all of us quit flying, we'll save all the whales or something. It's like, I'm really hesitant to believe any of this.
Yeah. It's very complicated, because any decision that you make has trade-offs. It's like, okay, I'm going to put solar panels all over my building, but you have to look at the actual life cycle and the materials of where those solar panels came from, and how much embodied energy is in them, and how long are they going to last, and what happens to them when they're thrown away, and of the life cycle. So the key words or phrases of life cycle assessment. That is really the best way to measure something, whether it's sustainable. How long is it going to last? What are the true costs of it over its entire life cycle? And if you're just picking one variable out of that and saying, well, if I just do this,
which is the energy,
or some aspect of it, you're not looking at the whole picture of it, and you're cheating. You're really lying. But to truly measure the life cycle of something and find the origins of all the materials that went into every piece of the building you're putting together, and where it's going to go as a recyclable and reusable things, it's that's what we actually need to measure to tell if something is sustainable.
So I've thought about this, and the way my brain works is that the closer we get to nature, just the healthier everything's going to be. It goes back to, honestly, David Marinick goes back to what he used to call the dumb code. In planning, there's something called the smart code, where you have these form-based codes to make something that resembles traditional urbanism. And then he came up with something he called the dumb code, which was, if you just build out of non-reinforced load-bearing masonry, it'll be objectively beautiful because it can be nothing other than that, since it's being built in a manner that follows the laws of physics and all of the principles of nature. And so it can be nothing but pretty, even if it's not perfectly ordered. And there's something about it that it's like, it's also too simplistic of a way to think about, but it's a place to start going backwards or forwards from the very, very kind of first principles.
Yeah, I guess the way that I would talk about it is we have a tendency right now to try and solve all of our problems with innovation.
Yes.
Like we need to invent something new to solve this problem that we caused by inventing something new. What if some of the most radical solutions are actually in our past, in tradition, and are actually really simple? They're right in front of us, or right behind us, I guess, in history. So I think that tradition really solves 4 problems, or can, if we're trying to solve modern problems. We can find a lot of solutions to modern problems in these 4 areas. One of them is sustainability, or I would call it solving our throwaway culture. 2 is the affordability crisis. Right. That's a huge problem. And 3 is this banal, like, sea of sameness. Everything is like the same, no matter whether I go to Atlanta or Beijing, or like just every building looks the same. And the last thing is our health.
That's a big one for me.
Yeah. So
the materials that we've used over the last 100 years are just destroying us.
Our modern materials are energy intense, and just putting high-tech gizmos like solar panels or wind turbines on them doesn't solve the problem, really. We take students to Greece, to northern Greece, to study these traditional settlements. There's thousands of them. And they would take their donkey, walk a few hundred yards from their house to the top of the mountain, load their cart with rocks, bring it back down to the village, and build their house out of rocks. And then they learned that this is an area with high seismic activity, that if they integrated wood and masonry together in this system, that it would resist earthquakes. And that building can be repaired over and over again, and it stays beautiful because it's following the laws of nature and physics. It's not doing anything, not playing any tricks on you, if like the structure is behind somehow with some hidden rebar and things.
I don't think there's going to be a lot of people who want to take their donkeys up to the mountain and bring down rocks.
So what does that mean for us? I think the principle is, like, the further you step away from nature, the more energy, the more potential for feeling artificial and like ending up being very difficult to repair. It's like these vinyl materials and aluminum and all these like quick, cheap materials that we use are not repairable sometimes. Like, I see a vinyl fence and it's broken. The only way to repair it is to replace the whole thing.
Yeah.
So wooden fence, you can sand it down and repaint it. That's more sustainable if you can repair things, and if they're more durable from the beginning, if they're going to last more than 5 or 10 years. So that's a part of the decisions that we should be making. Just very simple, maybe more intuitive answers, more natural, traditional answers to this question of sustainability. It doesn't always have to be some high-tech solution to a problem.
So you're saying AI may solve sustainability. Will AI tell us that you should go back to all tradition?
It's
We
interesting
should
that you
have
mentioned
ChatGPT that right now.
you mentioned AI, which is a tool that we use, and I think tools, going back to education, tools are really they're really important. They shape the way that we think. They shape what's possible, and they're not just totally neutral. So we need to be aware of the tools that we use in design. If we're talking about going back to architects, designers, how do you come up with the solutions? If you're using high-tech tools, they often lead you to certain solutions, and they restrict your freedom, where a pencil and paper gives you almost complete control as a designer, complete freedom to come up with creative ideas. So it's really important to us at UVU that we teach traditional tools. We also teach digital tools. We want them, students to be prepared with all the tools they need to succeed. But yeah, if you think things through and spend time in nature and in traditional cultures and traditional architecture, and look to the past, some really innovative solutions will present themselves that are not what you would think first, that they're not like the high-tech innovations. They're more innovations from tradition, looking through the lens of history and tradition.
But all this stuff in the past, it was created by a hierarchy of aristocracy and white males. So we should throw it all away because it's all evil.
No, I don't think that we should throw away everything from the past just because human beings who were questionable in their morals created them. We also shouldn't accept everything from those cultures.
Right.
Like, I think we've learned a lot. We've come a long way. And the good things that we've learned, the institutions like slavery and discrimination, and things that we've agreed and we've realized were terrible atrocities of the past. We need to move forward and take what's good and leave what's bad.
Yeah.
But not associate it all together. You're never going to find any culture that was perfect.
No.
And the modernist architecture that we're using today has been used by horrible dictators and oppressive regimes and giant global corporations that oppress and enslave people. So, like, what is left? There would be nothing left if everything's like guilty by association of who built it.
Yeah, agreed. I just had to bring that up. Now, one of the other complaints that'll happen when like modernist schools or modernist architects and that type of stuff, and I've worked with my fair share, they will complain about traditional architects copying. And so all it is, you're just copying and you're not being truly innovative. And that apparently is a thing that is wrong from a modernist perspective. I am trying to do my absolute best to actually steelman their argument, but I can't because it doesn't make any sense in my mind. But address that idea of why they accuse traditional and modernist or classical architects of not being talented, using tradition as a crutch, and just copying, and you're actually not very good, and it's just garbage. It's kitsch and not cool.
Yeah. So here's another quote for you. This is one of my favorites from Henry David Thoreau. He said, quote, every generation laughs at the old fashions, but follows religiously the new. If you are pointing the finger at someone else for copying, you've got to also realize how you are copying. And nobody is coming up with these ideas completely out of whole cloth that like have never been said before. We're pretending that maybe we are and really innovative and saying something original. But, I've traveled to schools all over the country. The work that their students are doing is very similar. We had a couple of visiting scholars from Greece a couple years ago, from a modernist school, the National Technical University of Athens. They came and they spent a couple weeks with us at UVU. So this is not a classical school, but a very good school in Europe. And a couple of professors who have some sympathies to classical architecture, but that's not how they were trained. That's not how they teach. They teach modernism. And at the end of their time with us at UVU, they made this really interesting observation. They said, at our school, all these professors are teaching kind of their own theories about architecture. Mm-hmm. None of us really agree on anything. We're all teaching our own individual way of doing it. Mm-hmm. And all of the student work looks the same. And then we come here and you guys are like all on the same page teaching this theory of architecture of tradition and classical. And all of the student work is so different. There's like this amazing variety in the student work. And so that gets back to this idea of tradition helping to solve a problem of the sameness, this kind of uniformity. And it was intentional. In the 20th century, they called the architectural style the international style. Mm-hmm. It was meant to be anywhere. It was meant to be very universal. This glass, box, steel, concrete, corporate kind of architecture.
To make everything look like everything else.
Yes. And it actually, like, if diversity is something that you care about, like, it was a very traditional cultures kind of movement. It erased diversity, local culture and diversity in our environment. And the derivative of that is the kind of dumbed down, strip malls and corporate boxes that we see everywhere in our built environment today. It's not this high-end modernism that is really sleek and like has all this refinement in the details. It's been dumbed down to be kind of a standard way of building. And it's everywhere and it's all the same. It really looks very similar no matter where you go. And it's using materials that are highly industrial and highly processed, where traditional cultures, you have a unique unique palette of materials and colors and proportions and motifs and ornament and these things that make Prague look different from, Paris or Tokyo, or Kyoto or New York. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of like influence from one place to another. But even within France, you go to Colmar on the east, and it's very different from Paris or cities in the west, and because they had their own culture that was creating these buildings. And that is something that I think a lot of people resonate with, wishing that we had places with more identity. Mm-hmm. They weren't placeless. They weren't just no places. Everywhere you go is just the same. And that takes a real serious study of cultures. And one of the reasons why I love this approach at and education is because it teaches students empathy for cultures that are not their own. We do projects in Israel and in Greece and in foreign countries and all over the United States to try and figure out like what is special about this place and how can I appreciate it, understand it, and then with humility try to like emulate it and be a part of this tradition that's here. That pulls students out of their comfort zone, forces them to consider ideas that are different from what they are used to, what they grew up with, and it's really helps them mature and become global citizens, I guess.
So I want to hit on a couple words that you said there.
Yeah.
Processed. When you said processed, I couldn't help but think of food. And so it's so processed. And I think that's a really good way for all of us to think about it. And so the more engineered the material is that you're using, steel, glass, that type of stuff, you can just think about it in the terms of processed. And so when you look at your food items that you get from the store, there's very processed foods, and then there's very natural foods that you can just pick from your garden that you grow yourself. And I think there is a big movement out there to get to more natural foods closer to the earth because we're realizing how much better they are for us. And the same goes for the architecture, this idea of being less processed. And that leads for all of your apples in less processed condition don't all look exactly the same.
Yeah, that's true.
They're kind of ugly sometimes, but there's an infinite variety of expression within a more natural application.
Yeah, we yearn for authenticity, and I think our generation and the younger generations are waking up and saying like all this processed food and processed life and consumerism, like it just really feels empty. And in the end, I feel disconnected from other people, and I want that connection because we're wired for connection.
Yeah,
and to each other and to nature.
Yeah, which is ironic because you mentioned earlier how technology, we keep trying to solve technological problems with more technology. And one of those connection problems we're trying to solve was with technology, phones, our little social media stuff. And we're realizing how bad that is. And who knows if we're going to solve that with another quote unquote technology, which won't be another solution.
Yeah. But I have friends who are like getting rid of their smartphones. It's going with the old, phone with buttons and simplifying life and trying to reconnect with people around them and finding that feels much more healthy.
Yeah. Oh, the challenge, the discipline it takes to do that. And so this, the word you were talking about, authenticity, the other camp, as it were, the modernist camp, complains about or will accuse the traditionalists and classicists in terms of architecture, art, the whole spectrum of the arts, of copying and being fake. It's like, what's the answer? Why is what you do or teach not fake when it's not actually following the same traditional construction methods? And so what's the difference between and trying to reach this authenticity? Because the reality is, if you think about a Walmart, it's a big box, right? It's a big concrete box to hold stuff. And we go and we pick stuff up and leave with stuff in a cart. And so there's nothing more authentic than a Walmart, because it is not trying to be anything other than what it is. You know what I'm saying? And so in terms of like that pursuit of authenticity, we are trying to pursue authentic, but that's a double-edged sword, because you can get, Hitler was authentic. He wrote a whole book about what he believed, and he went after that. That's a bad level of authenticity. Yeah. And so when we're looking at these pursuits in terms of principles, fundamental kind of ways of being, how do you answer the question architecturally from the other side about, well, it's just fake and all you're doing is just more fake stuff?
I think we have in us different natures. We have a divine nature that is seeking for transcendence beyond just the everyday mundane reality. So that everyday mundane stuff is part of us. It is authentic, but we are also transcendent beings who are striving for meaning and striving for a higher realm and beauty in our lives. And that's also authentic. That's true of who we are, our true nature. And we're looking for ways to connect with that part of ourselves. And we're in a world that has accepted a lot of standard ways of doing things that are counter to that. And we're trying to live life and not go to some kind of extreme. I mean, you could. Some people have said, like, there's so much wrong with our culture that I'm just going to try and escape and be a monk. I'm going to like refuse to do architecture because I just can't like do it with integrity, and unless it is 100% perfect. But most of us are finding some middle ground of trying to connect with what's true and good and beautiful the best that we can. And I think it's a fair criticism of classical and traditional architecture that some of it is fake. And it's a fair criticism of a lot of modernist architecture that some of it is fake. There's a few architects doing really like fully embodied traditional buildings built in a traditional way from start to finish. Those are amazing exemplars that we should strive to be like as much as we can. But I know you're a practicing architect with clients in the real world that have real budgets. And as we teach architecture at a university, we have a little more freedom to maybe ignore some of the constraints that you might have in the real world and design things that are more idealistic. But we also want students to understand the constraints, because if you propose something and it's like 10 times as expensive as a standard building, you'll be laughed at and never get anything built. So what do you do in that situation? You've got to find ways of incrementally working towards something better. And it's a very individual question and different depending on where you are. But I think we can take steps to improve how we build. Maybe we can't change the whole construction industry overnight, but in a project we could advocate for things that are more authentic, are more natural, less processed, and keep advocating for it. And maybe your client will go for it and maybe they won't. But it shouldn't stop you from having ideals. Every compromise should always hurt. And once it stops hurting, then you know, like, maybe it's time to retire. You have no ideals anymore.
No ideals. The thing that keeps going through my mind is just because you're right. I live in the real world in terms of like having to produce stuff. And so when it comes to fake, it's like movie sets are fake, right? But they tell a story. And so then you look at general facades of any given building. It's like, well, what are they doing? And what are they actually doing? What are they behaving as? It's like, because Walmart is a box. Let's just continue to use big box stores as an example, just because it's what's the problem with them? Because they're authentic. And then I think to myself, well, who cares about authenticity? Why does authenticity even matter? And so then I built a detached garage, like a little townhome, English townhome in my backyard. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's all covered in foam. And a lot of the details are out of foam. There's nothing more processed and fake and horrible for the environment than foam. And we have these energy saving things that we have to do, and we wrap our buildings in foam. Guess what? How long it takes foam to like biodegrade?
Right.
It doesn't.
Right.
Right. And so it seems to me that we, as a society, keep trying to chop branches off or keep trying to solve problems that are just the branches and not the root. And when it comes, I appreciate what you said about we should just be striving to something that's better. Like we can attack one thing at a time. And when we're accused of being fake, it's like, yeah, but at least I wasn't wandering around naked, because that's my true authentic self. It's like, you would have been very disturbed if I did that. If that's truly authentic, you don't want me to be truly authentic. You want me to clothe myself in a way that's acceptable to the overall composition that I am a part of socially. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for architecture. So in the pursuing of the thing that is better, how do you reconcile all of these principles and get to more fundamental axiomatic kind of claims, rather than just chopping these ideas, just discussing the kind of more superficial ideas.
Yeah. And as architects, we don't get to sit on the sidelines. We have to make decisions, and we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And it's not all or nothing. Like, we can have good aspects of things that we did that also had bad aspects to them. And I think it was Winston Churchill said, the further back that you look, the further forward you'll be able to see. In the Roman gods, they actually borrowed this god from the Etruscans. His name was Janus. Mm-hmm. And it's where we get the word January from. It's a god that has two faces. One looks backward and one looks forward. And if we keep looking to the past, we'll find wisdom. We'll find a lot of knowledge and solutions that are timeless and can be applied to these problems that we face today. That no culture in the past had exactly our problems. They didn't have access to the kinds of materials that we have today, and they weren't as connected to every other culture on the planet. And so I think it's ultimately, like, that is the moral choice that we have now, is to consider everything that we know and decide what's really important in a given situation. And am I going to make certain compromises in order to tell a story, or not? What's really important to each individual designer? And I don't pretend to have all of the answers. Those are the ethical questions that we pose to students, to say, you need to think about this. You need to search yourself and decide what really matters to you as a designer and as a human being, as a steward of the environment, and in helping to shape the civic realm. I use this thought experiment with our students where I say, picture yourself sitting on top of a mountain. Maybe it's in the Wasatch Mountains or the Uintas, and you look over and it's a pristine, natural preserve. And you look at your news feed on your phone, and it says that a developer has bought 10,000 acres here in this spot. It's going to build a new town. What kind of feelings do you have inside? Does that evoke, are you excited about that? Are you scared of what it will be? Leon Greer said that the shape of our cities is choice and not fate. We think that the way things have always been built is the way that they have to keep being built. But it's not true. Like, they've been built differently in the past, and we have freedom to build how we think they should be. And there are beautiful towns in Japan, Europe, United States, all over the world that didn't ruin nature. They actually, like, I'm really grateful that they exist. Takayama in Japan, or these places that, like, are so inspiring and really beautiful. They were improved through human intervention. And so that's what we have to ask ourselves. Are the things that we're building today, are they making it better, or are they making it worse?
Yeah.
And if you're a designer, you are part of the problem or part of the solution. Can't be neutral.
Well, that's a perfect place to end this one. I appreciate that. I had written on my notes, I wanted to get into the moral implications and whether there were any moral implications in terms of the pursuit of architecture and architectural design. And I appreciate you bringing us home to that point, that there are moral implications to how we go about what we create professionally. And it has lasting impacts for generations on individuals and on societies. So thank you so much for discussing kind of the whys of the pursuit of traditional architecture, both from an aesthetic standpoint, a sustainable standpoint, and a moral standpoint. We will continue this conversation in episode 3. We'll give some real just practical advice to upcoming students and any person, because all of us are students, and what we can do to transmit knowledge and just get better at observing our own environment, rather being casual observers, being more active observers, and understanding what we can and can't do about the environments that are built around us and how to improve our own world. So thanks for coming, Paul. And
thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this podcast. Till next time.